All right, Andy, what's it look like for math?
Okay, so this is a fun thing to think about. Check. I'm gonna try my podcasting skills here. Drop it in the chat below. We have a link for another number talk. Is that hit the?
Oh, that's right. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, hit the button down below. I'm trying to be fire.
Andy's got a. We'll put in the air horn. Andy's got a future on Twitch, I think. Welcome to Learning Out Loud, where we get curious about all things teaching and learning. I'm Stefan, a regional technology coach, here with Andy, a regional math coordinator, and Cari, a regional science coordinator. We're just three educators on a mission to dig into what works, what doesn't, and what we're still figuring out. This podcast is for teachers, coaches, and leaders who want to grow in their professional practice. We don't have all the answers, but we're asking the questions and recording the process. Let's go to work. All right, we're going to start off talking about thinking prompts, which is chapter 5. And to start this, I am going to show you guys a video. We're going to engage in a thinking prompt very quickly. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just watch this video, and then I have a question for you at the once you're done watching it, and we're going to have just a quick discussion based off of the prompt. Sound good?
Yep.
Okay.
And now to honor America and salute the men and women serving our country with our national anthem.
Can you hear that?
Please welcome, as voted by you, the fans, our winner of the Toyota Get the Feeling of a Star promotion, Natalie Gilbert.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the stars light stars?
Starlight's last dream.
Stars light,
Last dream.
last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. Oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, and the singing air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Oh, the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Okay, here's my question for you. How do the actions of Coach Maurice Cheeks, the athletic coach, mirror the actions that you like to see in an instructional coach or an instructional leader?
I think the first thing that popped into my head, Stefan, when you asked the question, was the fact that the recognition that help was needed, that there was like a struggle. There was a pause. It wasn't, he didn't jump in immediately, but like recognize that Natalie was struggling. And then he stepped alongside her and like with encouraging words was like, come on, like we can do this. And then started to sing along with. That's what I guess I saw, but also what I would think a good instructional coach would do as well is just recognize a need and then step in alongside.
Yeah, same thoughts of that, and then adding on a little bit of the the gentleness. I don't know how else to say that, but kind of that I'm here with you. I think you saw like a hand on the shoulder, kind of like, hey, we're here. We got you, supporting. Nothing urgent, like, oh no, things are derailing quickly. Was slow. It was kind of that we got this. And then also you saw like the conducting of Mo there. It's saying, hey, everybody, let's help along here, which is kind of that's getting more of like that celebration of we got it moving forward, similar to that idea of, modeling and then, oh, you're on your own and now we can do it together and the kids are enjoying and the faculty's looking in or whatever. But yeah, that celebration that they had a chance to get through it and we all survived,
What were you feeling while watching that? And I'd like you to turn this conversation kind of between like you two, Andy and Cari, you two kind of forget that I'm here.
I've seen it before, Cari. So what were you feeling?
I felt uncomfortable. Like I felt for that girl. One, it is such a hard song to sing. And she's on this national stage, right? And obviously very young. And I just felt for her because I would imagine I would freeze up as well and forget the words to something that she's probably sung hundreds of times, right? And practiced hundreds of times to prepare for that moment. And then had that happen where she just forgot the words or like, who knows what really was going on in her mind. But yeah, it was uncomfortable for me to watch.
And as a huge Sonics fan, Stefan, so throwing the Trailblazers out there was the first on a Monday. Jeez. But anyways, I had forgotten how like compassionate the coach was and a person that was like getting ready. Hey, we had to play, playing a game, like that. They're focused on game or winning and all that stuff. And just take the time to step to a person and say, oh, so I was like going, wow, that's a kind of a nice guy. He's an okay dude, even though he's a Portland guy. But I also felt the nervousness and like, oh gosh, I mean, just anyone that tries to do that, like even my kids or children that are singing in a holiday concert to the Star Spangled Banner in front of 16,000 people, whatever it is in there. Uncomfortable is probably, I'd be like, I would have turned and walked away probably. So to have that power, the confidence for her to kind of fight through it. And then someone stepping up next to her saying, hey, we got this, helping out. But I don't know. I felt a little bit uncomfortable is probably the right way as well. But also then like, oh, look at the compassion, look at the support, look at the kind of feeling a little bit, heartwarming there. It's like, okay, she could feel it too, it looked like, because she's got a little more power into it. And she started really nailing the notes and really singing it once it started going. So
there was a point though at which I did feel like maybe he could have stepped back because you could still hear his voice. So that like there was a moment, even though, like I said, I was uncomfortable and worried for her, like, oh gosh, girl. But then there was like, okay, Mo, like you could step back a little bit. We're hearing your voice and like this is supposed to be her stage. Like I don't know how else he could have been supportive because she did get tripped up multiple times throughout the song. Like he probably still needed to be there, but that was a thought that went through my head at some point when watching it. Was just, maybe he needs to drop back.
Yeah, but so that's a good question. Like, do you think that would have been like, I wonder what she would have done like on that moment, like you're in the middle of it, right? Like if I start stepping away, is that like, oh, where are you going? Or do you kind of like, hey, we've committed, so now we're in, like, we're in a lesson now. We're working through this, and then we'll reset next time. But once we support, do we step out saying, I don't know. I'm just wondering, Cari. I don't know if that's it.
So as you're saying that though, Andy, I was thinking about relationship. Like we don't know. Did Natalie know this guy before he stepped up beside her and started singing alongside her? Or would like, so I feel like there's a different response based on relationship. And I think that was my initial like, you need to step back. because to me, they're strangers, right? He was over on the sidelines preparing his team. He probably never even met this young girl that's stepping out there on the floor to sing versus like, I feel like where you were going, Andy, was like instructional coaching. When do we step out? Like, when is that okay? And I think that depends on relationship and us as coaches, knowing who we're working with and knowing when might be the right moment to step out.
On the flip side, right? If we're doing something, this just happened the other day, right? We're working with kids as an instructional coach to model or engage or to show a strategy or a routine or to bring a best practice forward to see how it interacts with kiddos, right? And sometimes the teachers jump in there if there's a discipline issue or a behavior issue or a learning component or whatever. And like, no, you guys get out, So, I mean, the singer by all means was not going like, oh, I got this, right?
Yeah.
So was definitely willing to help that part. But I don't know, that taking it to that level of, okay, one's too much support for learning and kiddos to what's needed to get through and have that confidence or that support's needed. I don't know. That was just and she won something to get there too. Like, so it's not like she couldn't sing or it wasn't like a first chance. So it was like something was nerves or that positive vibe wasn't there right at that moment. And so I forgot how the whole, and then the crowd came on and they could feel it all kind of like, okay, this is kind of a positive thing that could have gone really bad quickly if no one had stepped in. But
yeah.
As parents, both of you, by the end, how are you feeling?
Still saying go Sonics. Let me just put that straight out there. But if that was my child, right, I would have felt like, oh my gosh, what a good moment, what a good learning experience, and like that's growth, right? Like you fought through it, you persevered of all this adversity, and you might need some support down the road as much as you think you're ready to go. There's always the chance that you might need someone to help out or a team to help you out. So that's where my lens went when you asked that question.
Yeah, I guess as a parent, yeah, really proud that got through it. Really happy that somebody stepped forward to help, right? And that the crowd got in it to encourage her along. But yeah, I would have just wanted to embrace her and tell her what a good job she did and how proud I was of her. And kind of like Andy said, I'm sure there was going to be some processing after the fact. But she was smiling when she turned away. Yeah. She was smiling.
Yeah. What was the first thing she did at the very end? When she finished.
Did she hug Moise?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you can see her mouth, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She instantly turns, hugs him and says, thank you. And then goes. And then you can see the coach kind of walk back. And he's like I as someone who grew up in Colorado, right? Go Nuggets. A franchise that still exists, by the way.
Oh, ouch.
I know, gosh. Monday morning. Ouch.
Hey, the Mariners in the playoffs and the Rockies are not. They are very much not. He kind of walks back, and he's very like, he kind of felt like couldn't get out of the spotlight fast enough. People like kind of high-fiving him, and he's like, whatever. Yeah. And then she goes back probably to go find her parents, right? Not for nothing. I was watching you two when you were watching this, and because it's fun to pick on Cari, the second she started to fumble, Cari, you know what you did?
I probably looked away. Like, yep. Oh boy.
Instantly, right? And like you kind of look down because it is very uncomfortable. You feel so bad. And then as she started to kind of pick up, as the coach comes alongside her, both of you started to smile. Like, it's just very, very nice, right? Okay. Thank you for engaging with that. That is a thinking prompt, start to finish, right? We're going to talk about this. We're going to dig into the chapter. That took us, I don't have the timing here, but I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. And most of that was you guys talking, right? And that is the whole point of a thinking prompt is we're going to dig and pick this apart a little bit. But one of the things I want you thinking about is what were you doing and what was I doing? How much of a lift was this for me as the facilitator? I can tell you, like none, especially since I stole the example from the from the book. In case I forget to mention this, because I'm just now realizing I didn't put it in my notes. One of the things that the author says in this chapter that you can be doing as an instructional leader or a teacher to prepare for thinking prompts is just to be constantly on the lookout. Don't go combing the internet for these really great examples. What are some things you see in your life, in your real life, that you can like take and you can grab? I just last week, right, was I complaining to you guys about the AI generated commercial that I saw during Monday Night Football? Perfect thinking prompt, right? Like I could take that, I could put that in front of someone and say, what do you notice? Or like have a more intentional question, which we'll probably dig into when we get to Andy's chapter, right? Good questioning. But what's something you can be doing is you can just be, would that work? Is that, and there's some qualifiers and some descriptors that make good thinking prompts that we'll dig into, but just to kind of have that going in the back of your head is just a decent takeaway. So first and foremost, I'm going to walk us through the chapter here, but I'm going to start about 3/4 of the way through, which is the why would you do this? So just at a 30,000 foot view, the idea here is to promote dialogue through problem posing. The goal here is discussion, right? Not necessarily to come to the right answer. Notice that the question I asked you was very open-ended. How does? There's no 3, that's the right answer, or I can't give you a list of things that are the right answer. The goal is to get your participants talking by giving them a problem. It also has the advantage of decentralizing your classroom or your learning experiences. So it's not instructor led, right? One of the things I said we should be paying attention to is what was I doing? I'll mention this again later, but your conversations only really took off when I told you to pretend that I wasn't here and you two started talking to me. And that honestly wasn't something I anticipated, because I asked this and then you both addressed me just kind of reflexively. And I was like, I don't want them talking to me. I want them talking to each other. Right. So then I explicitly told you, and then you guys just dug in and made these connections and things I didn't even think about. So that decentralization of the classroom, making it more student led. And then it allows you to make connections and anchor learning. Cari, it never occurred to me that maybe you could have stepped away a little bit earlier. And like I had my own reactions to that, like you saying that. I've got but I put myself on mute, I think, at that point, because like I can't be talking in that process because you guys need to be making those connections yourself, right? So allows the learners to make connections, anchor learning, and then in that same vein, activate background knowledge. That's why I asked you the question about how does this make you feel as parents? Because when I watch this and I think of like my 6-year-old who is just intent on trying a bunch of things that he's not very good at and doesn't handle failure super well, despite us trying to coach him on that. It's scary. Right. And so like this video, I've watched it like 3 or 4 times and like gets me a little teary eyed every time, because like that's somebody's kid. Right. So it allows you to make those background knowledge connections. And then they are inherently engaging if done correctly. Right. Like we talk about engagement all the time. And what does engagement look like? Well, I mean, I guess sounds like I don't really like that practice because it can look like a lot of different things. But the idea that you both had a way to dig into this and make it universally accessible, they are pretty engaging tasks. Any thoughts about that before we start digging into the chapter?
Does the chapter talk at all about grade level and like student talk at different grade levels?
Great question. Not really. He does. Did this come up in your guys' chapters where he specifically identifies 2 different types of teacher, intensive, explicit, and constructivist learning?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
That comes up in my chapter.
Because I also read the introduction to this book and he outlines exactly what those are. But that's really the only distinction he makes. The idea, at least that I'm taking away, is that it can apply to any grade level. It just would need to look very different. And so I really like that question because I think maybe we dig into that as we talk. How is this different for your kinders versus your AP bio class?
Yeah. Well, and the reason I ask is because I often hear from teachers around classroom discussion, because in science instruction, classroom discussion should be focal to student learning. Kids should be talking about what they're seeing. They should be talking about what they're learning so they can make sense of it together without a teacher telling them. I guess that's that intensive explicit, right? Write this in your notebook. Here's what you need to know. And I hear from teachers that it's very challenging to get kids talking.
Yeah.
And so you were talking about how Andy and I were able to talk to each other. Well, we're grown-ups and we talk to each other all the time. Andy and I talk to each other like every day. So super easy, right? But when I reflect on
not, I have to talk to her, right? It's just
it's true. But when I reflect on my own middle school classroom, right? Awkward years. They're trying to figure out who they are as human beings. Some of them like retreat into little shells of themselves because they're so self-conscious. And this could be true across other grade levels and grade bands as well. But I hear from teachers, it is challenging to get kids to talk to each other, even around something that is engaging, because they're so afraid of saying something that they're going to get ridiculed about, or they're going to say wrong. It's the answer isn't 3. So I can't just put an idea out there because I don't know if it's the right idea. Yeah. And some of that I think is coached through schools unintentionally so by younger grade teachers, right? We kind of support kids in gaining these ideas that there's a right answer and a wrong answer. And if we wait it out, we're going to be told what the right answer is. And so we become afraid to take risks and share ideas. And I feel like I'm taking over the explanation of the chapter right now. So I apologize. I just was curious if Knight says anything in there about how to support different grade levels with talk. So.
Not explicitly, but he does, like, I'm just making notes, and he does end the chapter a little bit with some suggestions. He's got like 6 things to outline. If you are going to be doing this in your class, then do these things, like make sure these are the foundations that you have and build around that. And so obviously there's no one right way to do this. And it is going to be up to the individual teacher. Just say, like, your kids are having, you're having trouble getting your kids talking. I wrote down, because he's got the 6 things, and then I put 2 down here that are like, I would add this. Yeah. And I just wrote down as my 3rd under relationships. If you don't have a good culture or relationships in your classroom, then, and that looks different, I shouldn't use the word good. If you don't have a culture in your classroom and relationships that are conducive to authentic and vulnerable student talk, then yeah, these might fall flat. And so this is something you could easily drag and drop into any classroom at any grade level with intentional prep, but there's probably some foundational work that needs to happen first. If you have not taught your kids how to talk to each other, then this isn't going to work super well.
And personalities. And so something you were saying, Andy, made me think of, does it have to be verbal discussion? These are thinking, right? We're talking about thinking. What's your chapter again, Stefan?
Thinking prompts.
Thinking prompts. Like, can students write about it? There's strategies for students to have discussion where they don't have to say it and they can stay anonymous, right? You could do graffiti walls. You could do chalk talks. So kids can have discussion. They can put their ideas out there in a way that may feel safer for them if they don't feel like they can use their voice.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I would say, like, I'm all for universal accessibility, right? Like, if a kid can't access a verbal discussion, and that all goes into how you set up the students for discussion too, right? Like, you don't want to do this and then just have a whole group discussion. You've got 30 kids in there. You're going to hear from the same 3 every single time. That's not really good for anybody because everyone's just listening to this kid think. And so, solo reflection time, and then small group, then whole group solo reflection, like that stuff is all good. And universally accessible activities where, like, if you're noticing some kids are hesitant to verbally discuss, then are there anonymous ways to add your voice and pull those things out? Absolutely. Put all the good teacher moves on there. I would also say there is a lot of value in consistently pushing towards small group verbal discussion. The conversation can be more free flowing. Kids need to as an educational technology coach, that is a conversation that I grapple with people all the time. I mean, you want to get kids to be nicer to each other online, then give them opportunities to have deep, meaningful discussions in your classroom offline, because those behaviors translate, you know? And so when I get a question from people about, do you think, this is what I get, I've gotten like 6 times this year already. It is the end of September. Are kids' social skills being negatively impacted by social media? Yes. And we need to be doing something about that offline. It's not about teaching them to be good online. It's about giving them things like this. So I think kids are pretty used to writing things out and posting things anonymously and putting those. And so I think pushing kids out of their comfort zone to have those synchronous verbal discussions absent of any sort of technology or any other tools, where they are alone with their thoughts with a small group of people, I think that is the goal. Like, you should definitely push there, but it might take some scaffolding, right? It might take some working in that. So
yeah, that initial model, like, how you think about this now, and then build on it and change, and that might change, or you add on, or you get more clarity, or those kinds of things. But you don't have to be you can write that down and just leave it, but that's your own way of thinking at the time, and then build through that. Yeah, that scaffolding part's good.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's dig into the chapter a little bit, just because there are some things through here that we're already talking about, which is great. He starts off this chapter with like 2 anecdotes. He talks about this just like master teacher. Well, this coach and her relationship with this really good, like highly dedicated teacher who's teaching in like Topeka, Kansas, and she is working at a school with the 88% receiving free and reduced price lunch. So high level of poverty, or free and reduced price lunch in the school. And so it's really just meant to anchor the flexibility, I think, of where these thinking prompts can go, because he goes through and he outlines the way that this teacher uses thinking prompts to get kids to make connections to a book they're reading in an ELA class. And then the very next anecdote he gives is this professor that he was working at in a university in Toronto, who was teaching like journalism, and he would show thinking prompts to his journalism students, and he would just ask them, should this be shown on the news? Which is interesting. And when I first read that, I was like, I don't like really get how that would work. Thankfully, on the next page, he talks about the discussions they were having, and like he outlines this example of footage of a woman at JFK who had, like, the moment she found out her daughter had died in an airline crash. And so then they had this debate about how that's personal and private and you shouldn't be showing that. And I was like, I kind of fell in that. I was like, yeah, like that's a little messed up. And someone said, but if they don't show the clip, you're editing and sanitizing the news before anyone sees it. So the idea here was not that there was a yes or no answer to that clip. It's that these students needed to grapple with where they sat philosophically and ethically on what the function and purpose of news was, as opposed to just because you have a camera, does that mean you should write that whole thing? So again, I really, 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 really enjoyed reading this chapter, because it is all process over product. You need to have a clear understanding of what the intended learning targets are and what you want kids to learn, because just free flowing conversation with no purpose serves no one. But if you know the experience you want kids to get out of this, and kind of where you want the conversations to, like, what do you want them to center around, then it can be really, really powerful. Because if we're worried about engaging kids and getting them in conversations that they are passionate about, we can't tell them what they're passionate about. Right. And so these ones, it was just interesting that he took this like public school ELA example, and then also this collegiate journalism example. And it's like, look at the range that these things can cover. So it starts off with those 2 anecdotes, just a good way to ground that. But then he gets into like what are thinking prompts. So the idea here is that you put something. We used a video clip, and he outlines a couple of these things. And we've only talked about video clips so far, but he just describes them as any device a teacher puts in front of students to prompt thinking, discussion, and dialogue. So that's the idea here, is just to get your participants talking. So he name checks a couple of these things: video clips, newspaper articles, cartoons, pictures, problems, scenarios, art. Like, you can just anything. And the idea is to ask a good, deep, meaningful question. So he goes into detail about a couple of these, but the two that stuck out to me that I thought were interesting were like cases, like case studies. So he said, put students or participants in the middle of a problem relevant to what you're learning about. So as opposed to explaining what you're doing, you're saying you are here at the heart of this problem. You have the tools to solve this. Talk about what you would do. And just think about that activity. By design, you're going to be pulling in all of these different things, asking really good questions, right? Like, you are wondering about, well, how would they do this? And then you have generated the need for this knowledge. And then you as a teacher have the opportunity to get to that. The but the Avid model, like the Avid tutorials, like, they're built around that, right? Like, students bring these problems, and then those are thinking prompts for students to coach those other students, do some peer coaching. And then I was talking to this other teacher in a district in our region who had used an AI tool to reimagine the like civics in like the Articles of Confederation or something. And he said, this is something that's really boring typically for kids. And I used this tool to think about it a little bit differently. And what he thought was going to be a 20-minute lesson ended up taking like 2 or 3 days because kids were so heavily invested in the conversation. And we're all kind of laughing because we say we need to make history come alive for kids, but it's hard to find an into like 18th century politics when it's never been more relevant for them, right? They just don't see the in, but they found their in because he gave them essentially a thinking prompt, put them at the middle of a problem, and made them reason themselves out. He's got one more, which is, I thought was interesting how this would work. You should just put single words on the board. So he goes into all of these things, but he says, like, what if you just put the word respect, or what? He didn't put this one in the book, but we do this. We do this all the time as a teaching and learning team. How do we support the teachers in our districts, in our region? What are teachers probably struggling with? What we heard is, what's the one word that we grapple with all the time?
Engagement.
That was so fast, Cari. Yeah, it's right here. I could show if you want it, right? Engagement. Put that on the board in front of a group of teachers and give them an intentional question and say, what does this look like and sound like? What does engagement in the classroom mean to you? How do you design an engaging task, right? And again, it's not what makes you engaged if you're asked students, because there's answers for that, right? But the idea is to grapple with the concept itself. And what's important is kids or participants are not coming up with the answer. You're facilitating a conversation, and then you're leading them down a learning experience. Okay. So we talked a little bit about why, but the idea here is that you're generating dialogue, right? And you are really emphasizing process over product and meaning making during that activity. And then you're putting students in charge of the learning itself. So my first question for you, or I guess the first question I had prepped for you specifically, was, you are, with this task, you are asking teachers or facilitators to put the participants in charge of driving the learning. What risks come along with that?
Everything.
All right, we're good. Covered it. Attributes of learn. Come on.
What risks when the kids are driving the bus?
Yeah.
Geez.
Let me put it this way.
Well, here, look, let's just go with that. So this is when you said that, here's what I thought. That I'm giving control as a teacher that may feel like they don't know what they need to know, so I have to have control. Right? So that's just the way of maybe some teachers feel about education. Like, I am the giver of thinking and knowledge. And so to say like don't take away a kid's thinking doesn't compute with some people. Like, what do you mean? I tell them what they should know because I'm the facilitator or I'm the teacher, versus that flip of get them, like you just described, give them prompts, it's on a process and move them along. That's the pedagogy war, isn't it? Like, this is how we do it. They need to sit and behave and, figure out how to do the manual and figure out how to do the packet. So then when we push them over to the factory, they know how to do that. They'll survive. Like, that's the old way of kind of thinking versus like, here's a problem. How are you going to generate some strategies around it? And here's some ways to get you through there. And it may be different all over the place, but there's no factory for that. That's just life. That's just living. So I think that might be a big issue for a teacher to let go of that and say the kids won't know it, and then it'll be disruptive, and then the teacher's personality type might take over and say, oh gosh, it doesn't work because it's too crazy, and so I got to go back to them sitting in rows and sitting down, and then, oh, here, listen to me, I'll do it, and then you do it, and then you whatever. It's like, no, I know that's in books everywhere too, but I don't know if that's the right.
Well, and you're describing, we mentioned this already a little bit, but page 13 of the book, he defines like two categories of teachers, and you're defining what he calls intensive explicit instruction. So it's gotten a whole bunch of direct instruction, explicit, strategic instruction, but it's where teachers use intensive explicit instruction to efficiently and effectively teach content and significantly increase the likelihood that students will master the content. So the idea is very scaffolded, very structured, if this, then that, right? And it says the goal of teachers using intensive explicit instruction is for students to understand, remember, and then generalize, right? Apply that to other settings. And then he contrasts that with constructivist instruction, where he says these types of teachers believe each of us makes sense of the world by synthesizing new experiences into what we have previously come to understand. And I mean, he outlines both of these things. And I guess I would argue that, I literally have it written down in my notes that most teachers are a blend of both of those. Right? Good teaching involves some intensive explicit instruction and some constructivist instruction. And so when Cari asked, did he outline by grade levels? I said, not really, but he did break it down in between. Like, he kind of has this like how to use section. And he says, this is what it could look like in intensive explicit instruction. So thinking prompts do have a place. Like, if you're a teacher or you're working with a teacher that is much more structured, and I hate to use the term formulaic, but kind of intensive explicit, then there is a place for this type of activity in there. And that I think that constructivist teaching lends itself more to this. But honestly, that's where I see the dangers of this kind of instruction really grabbing hold. Why do you think that worries me more?
Well, my first thought, I have not read the chapter. This is a little challenging for me to say because I don't know exactly what he says in the chapter. But my first thought when you said that, Stefan, was if a teacher does not have a clear learning target where they're really just allowing the kids to drive the bus and don't know where the bus needs to go, then are they making meaning? Are they constructing the knowledge that it is the intention of that thinking prompt or that lesson, whatever it is? So if a teacher doesn't have a clear learning target and just lets the kids have the conversation and then is like, oh, somebody asked about this, so tomorrow we're going to talk about, this thing that came up in your conversation. I could see some real tangents and bird walks that may not be necessary for learning and could confuse learning for some students in the classroom. I don't know.
That's my worry, right? Is that if you do this without intentionality and direction and purpose and proper long-term planning, then you're just talking. And there's value in that. Academic value, arguable, right? Like, there's we talked at the beginning about developing social skills, and there's a whole bunch of standards around that, and kids need to, you need to build your community. But if you're doing this for an academic purpose and you are not prepared to harness the moment where it's ripe, their conversation is ripe for what you're doing next, then this won't do more harm than good, but it could be a kind of a waste of time, And I think it's easy to fall more. I'm gonna rag on these types of teachers, but I feel like I can because I am one. Like that constructivist piece is much more how I ran my classroom, where we're meaning making and we're synthesizing and we're driving our own learning. And I found myself leaning into. So yeah, I won't rag on them. I'll rag on me. I found myself leaning into like, I got so wrapped up in the conversation that we might not have learned anything. I do that in PD every now and then, where like I run over because I love the conversation so much. But if you don't follow that up with explicit like action steps and application and synthesis and actual meaning making, then you're just talking, and you gotta grab that piece there. Have I told you guys a story about the Montessori teacher I saw in Spokane, the kindergarten teacher? It was like the best teaching moment I've ever seen in my entire life, mostly because I'm just mystified by people who teach early learning. But I'm walking through this Montessori school and we go into this kindergarten teacher's classroom, and like these two like kindergartners, there was like some dispute over some book or something. And they're all self-directed, right? They're all doing their own thing. She's completely across the room. I watch her like kind of like peek up, like look at them, watch them do it, like watch them kind of go at it. She slowly makes her way over there. She doesn't grab the book or tell them to knock it off. She sits down next to them. She listens. Her presence they just looked at her, and then she starts asking them questions about the book, and they give her the book. And then she opens the book and starts reading the book. And in about 30 seconds, her entire class is sitting around her, and they've transitioned to carpet time, and they are all having a group. That was kind of a thinking prompt. It was very constructivist as a Montessori school is, but that was just this teacher who clearly had an idea of how to capture a moment and turn it into a learning opportunity. And I think that's one of the key things that come along with this is, actually that brings us into our kind of towards the end here, how to use these and some suggestions that he has. And just be prepared at the very end here. I'm going to ask you both, what does this look like in your content area? So keep that in mind. He talks about what these can look like in intensive, explicit and constructivist learning. But again, we already talked about that. The idea is that anyone can use these. And so if you're wondering, well, what would this look like in my classroom? I would do a little bit of self-reflection on which one of those teacher types do you have a tendency to fall more into, right? Because both types of teachers can do great things. And read that and do some reflection on how that might look. But he does end with some suggestions around, he's got 6 things. These are what you should put into place. First, I'm not sure if he put it first because it's the most important, but he says norms. So we talked about this a little bit. Kids need to be taught how to talk to each other and not dominate the conversation. So norms and structure, especially with students, are really important, but can be important with adults as well. He says you need the right kind, type, and level of question. So I stole his from the book for what we did. When we did this at our Instructional Coaches Institute in September, I took a different video, and then I went to ChatGPT and I described what I was going to be doing. And I said, here's what I would be looking for. And I had it spit out like 5 questions, and I picked my favorite and refined it. And that led to some good discussions in breakout rooms. So I wouldn't be afraid to like leverage ChatGPT for some deep, meaningful questions, because he also says in here more on that in the next chapter. So the chapter Andy read is questioning, right? And so I'm assuming we'll dig a little bit more into what he says about kind, type, and level of question. He says listen. And talked about this at the beginning there, where I muted myself so I could just listen to you and Andy, despite wanting to jump in. I think we are way too quick to do that as teachers and facilitators of learning, where they're saying something, I've got an opinion, if you're going to jump into a conversation, I think best practice is to ask questions. And he specifically says, offer authentic praise and paraphrase for clarity. So when kids are like rambling, you're not really sure, using some of that paraphrasing strategy can be super helpful. And then offering those connections, which is why I jumped in and said, how do you feel about this as parents? So where would I like to take this? Because you guys were really focusing on the instructional coaches piece, which is what I asked you to do. But I also wanted to tie in a little bit of the like the emotional piece, because he says, I actually skipped over attributes. He says good thinking prompts are provocative, complex, and personally relevant. So that like provocative, like it elicits emotion of some kind. And then he couples that with them being positive. So you'll get a much richer discussion. Well, actually what he says is that emotions are infectious. And so if you have this that's a very positive video. It's awkward at first, but it ends and it's very heartwarming. And that has a tendency to lend itself to a more positive classroom environment. And then concise. That video is like a minute and a half, right? So you wouldn't want to like read a short story and then use like this like mini novel as a thinking prompt. So offering those connections and then keeping dialogue short to keep engagement, but long enough to dig deep into the topic. So that's where I struggle with these the most, is the conversations are so rich. Let's just rock and roll. You got to know when to grab the conversation and move it forward. So just to sum up, he said norms, the right kind of questions, making sure you're listening, offering praise and paraphrasing for clarity, make connections to kind of drive the conversation without like telling them answers or being too explicit, and then keeping it relatively short but long enough to dig in. What I would like to add to that list is to know your learning objective. That's the number one thing I put down with 3 exclamation points. Talking can just be talking if you don't know your learning objective. And then I wanted to just point out that, again, we talked about it already, but when I said keep this conversation between you two and I muted my mic, that's when you guys really picked up, right? So in a classroom, that might mean physical distance. And that's typically what I do is I'll go over, I'll prompt, and then I walk away before they can ask me any questions. Just go. And then I'll keep an ear, but they need time and space to start engaging those questions. And then along with norms, I'd like to add relationships. You need an effective culture and relationships in your classroom to promote dialogue. If your classroom is not one where you might expect students to respect each other, but if that's not on display, then these will do more harm than good, because you have decentralized your classroom. You have given up a little bit of control. And if students are given that freedom without any kind of accountability, stuff's going to happen. You're not going to be able to see what's going on and hold students accountable. And so that, I think, is where Andy is kind of talking about a little bit with, well, this isn't going to work in my classroom. I think we have a tendency to when things aren't going well, we grab tighter, right? And tighter and tighter and tighter. And the more we hold on to kids that tight, the more they're going to want to try to break out. So sometimes it can be counterintuitive to let that go, but you need to let go with structure and purpose and accountability. So all of that to say, thinking prompts specific to science and math. What does this look like?
Well, I think thinking prompts can look like a video, any of the things that you listed, Stefan. It can be a case study. It can be a newspaper article. It can be an image. We've used images before. It can be a scientific phenomena. We talk about that a lot in science. It should be phenomenon based. So it should be something from the natural world, something that a student might encounter. And then they try to make sense of it through conversation and through investigations. And so I talked about how discussion is really important to the science classroom, and time is always of the essence for teachers. So often what gets cut out is discussion, because that takes time. But I appreciated what you were just saying in the book that talks about timing and not letting it go on forever. It can't be the whole class period. You just need to allow conversation so they can get deeper. And then you grab it when it gets to something, right, that attaches to your learning target, your learning outcomes. And then as a teacher, you can facilitate through the next steps that you have planned out. So we talked a little bit about it being student-led and how scary that can be. But if you're, as a teacher, really clear about what are the learning outcomes I want for my students, then you're going to be listening for those moments in the conversation that connect to the learning target. And you know that tomorrow we're going to do an investigation on this because I know it helps explain this phenomenon. And I'm just going to wait until the kids come up with it, because they will. And then you grab it, and then it seems like they're driving the bus to the kids too, right? They're like, oh, we talked about this yesterday, and now we're going to try to answer this question that came up in our conversation. But as a teacher, you knew, and you have it planned out, and it's still going to get you to where you need to go. I'm kind of derailing here a little bit, but yes, phenomenon-based science instruction, I think really it is thinking prompt based as science instruction. You are giving them something to think about, something to make sense of together as a collaborative learning community. Something I also wanted to connect with what you were sharing as some of his tips that I didn't hear is like the planning part. You talked about type of question, kind, type, and level of question. But I think teachers really need to think about and plan for discussions. And it takes some time, but have prompts ready. Like if you know your learning target, then you know where you want this conversation to eventually go. It doesn't have to just be a free-for-all where you have one question. I don't remember a question, Stefan. I apologize. Like how
it doesn't matter. The question doesn't matter.
yeah. But you started us with one question, and Andy and I were able to talk about it, and our conversation circled around what it was supposed to. But you can anticipate that students aren't going to get there, so you're going to need other questions to be able to drop in. Not all the time, not constantly steering the bus, but every once in a while, when maybe the conversation stalls or you feel it going in a direction that isn't toward your learning target, then you can pull them back with these other questions that you have planned for in some, you've written them down somewhere for yourself. You've planned out what you want kids to talk about.
Well, I love that because it's not questions you're putting on the board.
Right.
Like you're all going to talk about these. It's like things you've got in your pocket.
Yep.
When you start like, oh, and then you can fall. Yeah. What the ounce of preparation is worth a pound of cure, right?
Yeah. Yep. The 6 Ps. I can't remember them all right now, but
split pea.
No, 6 Ps. The 6 Ps of preparation.
Oh, no,
I have
no idea what you're talking about. That'll be a later episode.
Yeah.
All right. I'm just trying to figure out where Cari thought she was going off the rails.
I thought I was like, here I go talking science. I could talk science for like the next 3 hours.
We literally asked you to talk about science.
Yeah, that was the prompt.
All right, my 6 Ps. I wrote it down. Ready? Prior proper planning prevents poor performance.
Whoa.
Oh man.
Wow. That's a tongue twister.
I read it somewhere. You can cut that out.
All right, Andy, what's it look like for math?
Okay, so this is a fun thing to think about. Check. I'm gonna try my podcasting skills here. Drop it in the chat below. We have a link for another number talk. Is that hit the?
Oh, that's right. I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
Hit the button down below. I'm trying to be fire.
Andy's got a. We'll put in the air horn. Andy's got a future on Twitch, I think.
Okay. So number talks you mentioned already. Just that idea of how. The purpose of number talks without getting into that too much, but the idea that there's an image and how you see it, you're already connecting to what they're thinking about. So they have to come with their own way of visualizing it. And when you share your thought, I'm already connecting it to my thought of how I see something or solve something. And so that's true engagement, right? I'm actually listening to your explanation of a solution to an addition problem or a pattern or whatever. And then Cari says, oh, I see it differently. And so then all of a sudden we're bouncing off different ways of seeing the image or the problem and getting the same or different results. I mean, that's a great and I'm comfortable now because my thought is also listened and observed and critiqued and maybe wondered about as well. So all of a sudden I'm a part of the community of learning. And so those number talks do a great job of dropping the math down so far that it's not about learning addition, subtraction, whatever the skill. It's really sharing my thinking, and that's that. When our author called with thinking prompts, Jim Knight, thinking prompts, or we call them in math perhaps thinking tasks, or maybe science phenomenon based, like these things that get the wondering part of it. And and we mentioned a little bit some of the work that we are doing in mathematics around Peter Lildahl and the building thinking classroom is really that idea that if thinking's a necessary part before you can learn, right? So if you're not thinking, then you're not going to learn. So if we all agree to that as a thing, so like if I put out a worksheet that says use the algorithm to solve something, we're not really thinking about that. We're just going through and teachers may view it as thinking because they complete it, but realistically they are just regurgitating something. And there's really not, they're low level thinking, I guess I could call it. I'm not an expert in the thinking idea, but they're not out there. But if I say, something like a task, like, how many ways, Stefan, I think we talked, did we do the 3D tic-tac-toe?
Yes.
Yeah. So how many ways? Yeah. How many ways can you win in a 3D tic-tac-toe? Your brain is already shifting to like, oh, wow, there's a lot of components and a lot of pieces. And that's kind of like this idea that when we get to the questioning part, setting up that thinking task, because if it's just like, what's your observation? Then those are all just like quick, oh, I see this, I see this, I see this. But then how do you build it up to something that's like, oh, I have to bring a strategy, or I have to bring some knowledge, or I have to listen to others, and that's okay. Because in mathematics, there seems to be like it's a gatekeeper of individualization. If Andy can't do it, then good luck to him later on, which is another plug for Count It Out. If you want to think about that, about ideas that we all are able to move forward in thinking mathematically and scientifically, that shouldn't be used as a gatekeeper. So if we open up a way to think about things and give them strategies of different ways of moving through it, then all of a sudden kids have connected and they are willing to get into it. And they're like, oh, I am successful. It's not about time. It's not about how fast I'm done or how my percentage out of 100, which, my own child comes home and goes, I got a 95 out of 100. I go, great job. He goes, yeah. I go, well, did you miss 5 questions, or how did you many miss? He goes, I don't know. I'm like, well, just that alone. I mean, did you take 100 question? That's a lot. Or was it 10? Just having those kind of ideas of like what things mean to you, and not just a score or what'd you do? I don't remember. Well, then you weren't really thinking probably too much if it's not sticking, making that learning stick, which I think is the name of our book study, right? I hope.
That's what I search for in PD and Roller every time I want to find it.
Like it. Sticky. So
I wanted to.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I just said that the task idea is right in line with what he's talking about. And there are thousands of tasks out there. And I'll share mine here in chapter 6 in a moment. But
I just wanted to connect math and science together based on what Andy just shared, thinking about the practices. So in math, we have math practices. In science, we have science and engineering practices. And in both of those lists of things that we want students to be able to practice and gain skill in is constructing viable arguments, which I think a thinking prompt does, right? I'm in a conversation. I need to be able to explain my thinking. I need to be able to make a claim and use evidence, whether it's from my own personal experience or something we've done in class that I can pull forward. But those are practices, and practices for life, right? Like we all need to have that ability to construct an argument. And I don't mean like argue with each other, but make a claim. And support a claim. And I imagine it shows up in other content areas as well. I just am more versed in science.
We'll name drop her here, but Lisa, we'll leave her last name out of it. Lisa, as we were doing the essential standards work with some districts, would say there's like 5 standards or concepts that show up in every content's standards. And one of them is constructing and supporting a claim.
Yeah.
So, and you're right. This is all over that.
Yeah. Because otherwise kids do a great job to mimic what we tell them, to fake it till they make it, to slack and stall. I mean, they're great at that, but if they're, and we know that the results aren't as well. If they can turn in a worksheet and get grades, great. That's just like, currency with classroom, and I got it, whatever. What's my grade? Whatever. But like if I'm really thinking into something, then all the ones that are able to navigate the social structure of turning in points and that, then some of those kids are the ones that really struggle, the ones that are the A's and B's kids, because now you're really asking them to support your claim. Well, I just got the right answer, right? That's all I have never needed. And we notice as they get higher up in mathematics and in science, those are the kids that start struggling because justification, thinking with a group, not being individualized in your education, being part of a group is more important and leaned on, even in our work that we do as adults. Like, we are working in teams all the time, and if it was just what Cari did by herself or what Stefan did or Andy did by themselves, we would be, I don't think, as successful at all either. So it's a good strategy to teach kids as well. Like, no, work together and think with these people, even though you don't know them very well, or you don't connect with them, or they are not part of your social group or whatever. But that's the important part. And you only can do that when they're up and working together, or they're up and thinking about a task, or those prompts, like you're saying. Like, I'd be curious to see what kids would have to say about that girl that you watched singing a national anthem and struggling, and then, asking like, how did you feel when, the same thing as a child, and say, oh my gosh, like that kid put themselves out. Oh, this person helped out. So you're not all year long, we are a team, and we are working together. So that was those thinking tasks in math and science are kind of where we want to land all the time, and then so you lean into that implicit instruction, or that direct instruction, or whatever they're talking about. Sprinkle that in versus the other way of, we're going to sprinkle in these fun tasks time, and then, or my favorite comment is when I walk into a district, I'm leaving, and they go, are you coming back tomorrow? The kids are, yay. We love it when we don't have to do math during math time. And I'm like, yes.
Gotcha.
Right? And say it louder so the teacher can hear, because that's what you really want, right? Like, they learned something and they were engaged for 40 minutes, and they didn't view it as math or school or whatever. So how will we get more kids that experience? And I think that positiveness is kind of fun as you start wrapping things up and say, hey, teachers, look at that. Those kids were engaged and having fun and excited about what they were doing. We'll check their learning, we'll check their standards, but sometimes that's the barrier. The task part, they don't see the connection with, when do we have time to do that? Because we have all these standards. It's like, well, no, that's the thing. So let's talk about that later in terms of how you can make those connections with the learning targets, as you mentioned, or the standards that we are required, quote unquote, to cover, et cetera. So, no, good stuff. And I can't wait to hear other people's ideas when they're reading along and bringing their experiences too, like as a coach or as a teacher, or with a certain population of kids that they can bring their lens. So this was good conversation, Stefan and Cari. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that'll about wrap up thinking prompts, and so we can call it here. Just some final thoughts around that. Some of the things that we unearthed in our conversation that I guess weren't really top of mind for me that I really value was just that intentionality piece of where are you going next. It is process over product, but where does that process take you? I think is really important. Cari, what you said about the preparation of having other questions. I am so bad at that. And me asking you, how do you think about this as parents, was something that I just pulled off the top of my head. And had I done a little bit of more intentional planning on that, I think I probably would have had that one ready to go. And I would have been looking for the opportune time to ask that question. So I really liked the asking questions in advance. And then Andy, what you were just saying about the learning experience and that metacognitive thinking, I think it can really lend itself to that. I'll say it one more time, since I said it towards the beginning, but it's worth ending with, is if this is something that you find value in, be on the lookout for these things in the wild. You could go Google thinking prompts or whatever, and it's not going to be very good. But If you are listening to the radio or listening to music or scrolling online or reading a book or looking at art, you don't need to be looking for it intentionally, but just as things jump out to you, then like grab that and saying, you know what, if it actually, here's a good way to think about it. If it sparks an emotional reaction in you, then that's something you could probably take with that filter that it's appropriate for whoever your audience is. So just be on the lookout for those thinking prompts. Thanks for learning with us today. If something we said sparked a thought, made you nod, or something Andy said made you roll your eyes, we'd love to hear about it. Share the episode, tag a colleague, send it to your PLC, or just keep the conversation going within your own team. You can connect with us via the feedback form in the show notes, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, feedback, and suggestions for topics to cover in future episodes. We're all growing together, and that starts with paying attention to our own practice.